Eala posted a 15-second clip that nobody saw coming. Within hours, brands were at war, the WTA was scrambling, and tennis Twitter was on fire. It wasn't a tantrum. It wasn't a complaint. It was a single moment of honesty that exposed everything the sport tries to hide. One viral video, one question, and an entire industry forced to pick a side. It started like any other Tuesday night. Eala had just finished a brutal 3-set qualifier in Lyon. The kind of match that drains everything from you. The kind where your legs shake climbing the stairs back to the locker room. The kind that cameras don't show because you're not a top 10 player yet. She was alone in her hotel room. No team, no coach traveling with her that week. Just her, a phone, and the raw exhaustion that comes with chasing a dream nobody promised would be fair. And then she did something that would change everything. She hit record. The video was 15 seconds long, no filter, no script, just Alex sitting on the edge of her bed, still in her match clothes, holding up a pair of training shoes that had visible holes in the soles. Her racket bag was open in the background, showing gear that had clearly seen better days. Her face was flushed, hair still damp from the match, eyes tired but honest. The caption was simple: "This is what living the dream really looks like." She posted it to Instagram at 11:47 p.m. local time. Then she probably fell asleep thinking nothing of it. But the internet never sleeps. By morning, the clip had 500,000 views. By noon, it had crossed 2 million. Tennis forums were dissecting every frame. Reddit threads were comparing her situation to other rising stars. Twitter was split between those defending her honesty and those calling her ungrateful. Because here's what nobody wants to admit. Tennis sells you a fantasy. The private jets, the designer outfits, the champagne sprays after Grand Slam victories. What it doesn't show you is the years spent in challenger tournaments, with prize money that barely covers your flight home, the hours alone in budget hotels, the injuries you play through because you can't afford to skip tournament. Eala wasn't complaining. She was just being real. And that terrified people. The comments section became a war zone within hours. Some fans praised her transparency. Finally, someone telling the truth. One comment read, with over 40,000 likes, "The WTA needs to see this," said another. But corporate accounts stayed suspiciously silent. PR teams were clearly scrambling, because this wasn't just a cute behind-the-scenes moment. This was a 20-year-old Filipino athlete, ranked outside the top 100, showing the world that the emperor had no clothes. Her main sponsor had just launched a global campaign about empowering the next generation. Their billboards showed smiling athletes in pristine gear. Their commercials talked about dreams coming true. And here was one of their own sponsored athletes, showing the gap between marketing and reality. The video kept spreading. Tennis journalists started writing think pieces. Podcasts dedicated entire episodes to her. 48 hours after the video went viral, Alex's main sponsor finally broke their silence. The statement came through their official Twitter account at 9 a.m. Eastern Time. It was corporate. It was careful. It was exactly what you'd expect from a legal team working overtime. We are incredibly proud to support Eala and her tennis journey. Our commitment to athlete development remains unwavering. We provide comprehensive support to all our ambassadors and are always open to about their needs. Notice what they didn't say. They didn't address the worn-out shoes. They didn't mention the gap between their advertising promises and the reality their athletes faced. They used the word support 3 times without defining what that support actually looked like. The internet noticed immediately. Within an hour, that tweet had a worse ratio than a political scandal. Thousands of comments calling it tone-deaf. Hundreds pointing out that dialogue isn't the same as action. The brand's social media team started deleting the most critical responses, which only made things worse. Because in 2026, you can't just PR your way out of authenticity. But here's where it got interesting. Rival brands smelled blood in the water. A competitor brand, one that had been fighting for market share in tennis for years, posted something brilliant. They didn't mention Alex by name. They didn't even reference the controversy directly. They just posted a photo of their athlete support program. With the caption, "Real support isn't a photo op. It's showing up for athletes at every ranking, every level, every day." The implication was crystal clear. Another sportswear company went even further. Their VP of Athlete Relations posted a thread breaking down exactly what their contracts included for developing players. Travel stipends, equipment replacement policies, mental health resources, performance bonuses that started at challenger level, not just Grand Slams. It was a masterclass in competitive positioning, disguised as transparency. Social media erupted into camps. Hashtag Team A-List, started trending alongside #athletesdeservebetter. But there was also pushback. Accounts that seemed suspiciously new started posting about how athletes need to be grateful and nobody forced them to play tennis. The discourse became toxic fast. Tennis Twitter split into faction. Some defended the traditional sponsorship model, arguing that rising players need to earn their support through results. But others pointed out that you can't get results if you're playing injured with inadequate gear, because you can't afford better. Former players started weighing in with their own experiences. One Grand Slam champion shared a story about playing 3 years on tour before she could afford to travel with a coach consistently. Another talked about choosing between physiotherapy and eating properly because her sponsorship didn't cover both. The Tennis Channel dedicated a panel discussion to it. Even mainstream outlets were covering the Eala controversy as a sports business story. And then the WTA decided to respond. The statement came through official channels at 2 on a Friday, probably time to minimize immediate backlash before the weekend. But in the age of social media, timing means nothing. The statement read, in part, "The WTA values all our players and the partnerships that make professional tennis possible. We remind all athletes of the professionalism standards outlined in the player handbook, including conduct on social media that reflects the integrity of our players are encouraged to work directly with their management and sponsors regarding any contractual or support concerns rather than public forums." Read it again. Look at the language. Professionalism standards. Conduct on social media rather than public forum. They weren't addressing the issue. They were tone policing the person who raised it. The response was immediate and nuclear. Within 30 minutes, current players started subtweeting. Nothing direct enough to risk fines, but pointed enough that everyone knew exactly what they meant. One top 50 player posted, "Interesting how professionalism always means silence." Another shared a quote about institutional gaslighting with no additional context needed. But the most powerful response came from someone unexpected. A recently retired player, someone who'd won multiple Grand Slams and had nothing left to lose, posted a long-form statement on Instagram. She detailed her own early career struggles, the times she played injured because she couldn't afford to drop in rankings, the sponsorship contracts that promised support but delivered the bare minimum, the culture of silence around financial struggle, because admitting it meant being labeled difficult or ungrateful. And then she said something that broke the internet. The WTA's response to Eala tells you everything you need to know. They're more concerned with protecting brand relationships than protecting players. "I'm glad I'm retired because I can finally tell the truth." That post got millions of views in hours. Tennis journalists started pulling up old interviews, old quotes, old moments where players had hinted at these struggles, but stopped short of being explicit. Patterns emerged. Stories that seemed like isolated incidents suddenly looked like systemic issues. The WTA's statement had done the opposite of what they intended. Instead of quieting the controversy, they'd validated every criticism. Instead of showing support for their athletes, they'd shown exactly where their priorities lay. Behind the scenes, sponsors were reportedly furious with the WTA for making things worse. Some were considering how to distance themselves from the statement. Others were doubling down, seeing the backlash as proof that athletes today don't understand professionalism. Tennis was eating itself from the inside. Mainstream media picked up on the player rebellion angle. Headlines wrote themselves. Tennis stars revolt against the WTA after controversial statement. Generation gap in tennis explodes over social media policy. Is professional tennis broken? The answer, it seemed, was yes. And it had taken one honest video from a 20-year-old to prove it. The WTA had poured gasoline on the fire. But they had no idea that brands were about to turn this into an all-out war. By the end of week 1, this was no longer just a tennis story. It had become a case study in brand strategy, athlete empowerment, and corporate responsibility. And 2 major sportswear companies were about to turn it into a battlefield. The first shot came from a brand that had been relatively quiet during the initial chaos. They'd watched, they'd analyzed, and they'd seen an opportunity that was too perfect to ignore. On day 8, they held a press conference, not a social media post, not a written statement, an actual press conference with their CEO, their head of athlete relations, and 3 of their sponsored tennis players who were ranked outside the top 1. The announcement was stunning. They unveiled the Rising Stars Equity Initiative, a complete restructuring of how they supported developing athletes. Every player they sponsored, regardless of ranking, would receive a baseline equipment package worth $15,000 annually, automatic replacement for worn gear, travel stipends for tournaments outside their home region, access to sports psychology and mental health resources, and most importantly, performance bonuses that started at challenger level, Not just the tour level. The CEO was direct. We've heard the conversation happening in tennis. We've listened to athletes like Eala, who've shown us the gap between our marketing and their reality. Today, we're closing that gap. Because supporting the next generation shouldn't be a slogan. It should be a standard. They never mentioned their competitors by name. They didn't need to. The tennis world exploded again. Alex's original sponsor was put in an impossible position. They could ignore it and look worse by comparison. They could match it and admit their previous support was inadequate. They could attack it as a publicity stunt and risk looking defensive. They chose option 3. Their VP of marketing went on a major sports podcast 2 days later. He talked about sustainable partnerships and earning support through dedication. He implied, without quite saying it directly, that instant equity programs would create entitled athletes who didn't value hard work. The quotes were clipped and spread across social media within minutes. The backlash was immediate and savage. Athletes from multiple sports, not just tennis, weighed in. Basketball players talked about their shoe deals. Soccer players discussed their equipment contract. The conversation expanded beyond tennis into a broader critique of how sports corporations treat developing athletes across all competitions. But here's where it got truly chaotic. A third brand, one that had stayed completely silent until now, saw both of their competitors bleeding and decided to twist the knife. They launched a social media campaign called Real Support. They partnered with mid-ranked athletes across tennis, track and field, and swimming to share unfiltered videos about their experiences with sponsorships. The controversy had somehow grown larger, more complex, more consequential with each passing day. And then, at 7 p.m. Manila time, Eala posted again. It wasn't a corporate statement run through PR teams. It wasn't a carefully crafted apology, designed to make everyone comfortable again. It was Alex sitting in the same hotel room, wearing a simple t-shirt, looking directly into the camera. The video was 2 minutes and 43 seconds long. She started with a breath that you could tell was steadying her nerves. Hi everyone. I know a lot has happened since I posted that video almost 2 weeks ago. I've been quiet because I needed time to process everything, to understand what I actually wanted to say, because this became so much bigger than I ever imagined. Her voice was calm, but you could hear the weight in. I want to be really clear about something. That video wasn't an attack on anyone. It wasn't a complaint. It was just a moment of honesty. After a really hard day, I was exhausted. I was alone, and I was just being real about what that moment felt like. She paused, looked down briefly, then back up. But I've read everything that's been said. I've seen how other players started sharing their stories. I've watched brands and organizations respond. And I realize now that my truth was a lot of people's truth. That what I felt alone in my hotel room that night, hundreds of other athletes were feeling in their own rooms, on their own journeys. This was the moment everyone had been waiting for. Would she apologize? Would she back down? Would she escalate? I'm not sorry for being honest. I can't, because if my honesty made people uncomfortable, maybe that discomfort was necessary. Maybe we needed to have these conversations that everyone was avoiding. The internet held its breath. To my sponsors, I'm grateful for your support. This sport is expensive and impossible without partnership. But I also think we can have gratitude and honesty at the same time. I can appreciate what I have and still acknowledge that the system could be better. Those two things aren't contradictory. She shifted slightly and you could tell she was getting to the heart of what she wanted to say. To the WTA, I respect this organization and what it's built for women's tennis. But I also think we need to talk about how we support players at every level, not just the ones who make headline. Because everyone at the top was once where I am now. And the path shouldn't be this hard just because we're still climbing. Then she said something that would be quoted in every article written about this controversy for months to come. If my truth makes you uncomfortable, maybe that's the point. Maybe discomfort is where change starts. I don't have all the answers. I'm 20 years old trying to make it in professional tennis. But I know what I've experienced. And I know I'm not alone in experiencing it. She ended with a small smile. The first genuine expression of the whole video. Thank you to everyone who shared their own stories. To the players who spoke up even when it was risky. To the fans who asked questions instead of just accepting how things are. 3 weeks after a 15-second video changed everything, the tennis world was still feeling the aftershocks. Eala played her next tournament in Prague. She won her first qualifying match in straight sets. The press conference afterward was packed with journalists who never covered a qualifying round in their lives. They asked about the controversy. She answered briefly, politely, then redirected to tennis. I'm here to compete, she said. The conversations happening are important, but right now I need to focus on my game. She lost in the final round of qualifying, but her social media following had tripled. Sponsors who'd never looked at players outside the top 100 were suddenly interested, not because of her ranking, but because of her influence. The brands that had gone to war were still repositioning themselves in the aftermath. The company that launched the Rising Stars Equity Initiative saw a massive surge in positive brand sentiment. Their athlete roster grew. Young players specifically requested to be considered for their sponsorship programs. They'd turned a PR crisis into a competitive advantage. Alex's original sponsor quietly updated their contracts. They didn't make a big announcement, but players and agents noticed. Equipment packages improved. Support structures expanded. They'd learned that in modern sports, authenticity matters more than traditional marketing narratives. The brand that had criticized equity initiatives faced the harshest backlash. Several high-profile athletes chose to not renew their contracts. Their social media engagement dropped. They eventually hired a new VP of athlete relations and announced a listening tour to better understand player needs. The market had spoken, and it had sided with transparency. The WTA's task force held its first meeting in week 4. They included players from different ranking levels, different regions, different stages of their careers. Early reports suggested real conversations about prize money distribution, travel support, and mental health resources. Would it lead to actual change? That remained to be seen. Institutional change is slow, but at least the conversation was happening at the highest levels, not just in hotel rooms and private group chats. Other sports were watching. Player associations in basketball, soccer, and golf were having their own internal discussions about athlete support models. Alex's moment had rippled beyond tennis into a broader conversation about how professional sports treat developing athletes. Tennis journalists continued to investigate. More stories emerged about financial struggles at lower-ranking levels, about the mental health impact of constant travel with inadequate support, about the players who quit not because they lacked talent, but because they couldn't afford to continue. The documentary series The Real Tour announced it would dedicate an entire episode to player economics in Season 3. Alex had been approached for an interview. She was considering it, but perhaps the most significant change was cultural. Young players felt permission to be honest about their experiences, to share the hard moments alongside the highlights. Eala didn't set out to start a revolution. She just wanted to share a moment of truth after a brutal day. But that truth exposed something that tennis world had been ignoring for decades. The gap between the dream we sell and the reality athletes live. What started as one viral video became a movement. Brands went to war over athlete support. The WTA was forced to confront uncomfortable questions. Players found their voices, and an entire industry had to decide whether it cared more about protecting its image or protecting its athletes. The story isn't over.